Board meets every third Tuesday of the month to review proposals for changing the city's comprehensive plan, its future land use map, zoning or changes consistent with the map, and conditional use permits. In accordance with city protocol, face coverings must be worn while attending this meeting, particularly given the number of attendees today and the inability to maintain adequate social distancing. You may remove your mask when speaking to the board at the podium, centered between the board and the first row of seating. The board is made up of 7 members appointed by the City Commission and is assisted by the staff of the Community and Economic Development Department. Staff will advance any presentation slides that should be provided prior to the meeting. The meeting is divided into 2 parts. The first part is the public hearing, where we expect to hear new applicants explain their request and receive comments from affected parties. The second part of the meeting is termed the general meeting, and primarily consists of acting on recommendations from staff about the cases that came up prior to the prior month's meeting. We invite everyone who wishes to participate to be heard. We do ask that you be concise in your comments and that speakers avoid being repetitive. That is, if several people have pointed out traffic concerns, there is no need to hear additional comments regarding traffic again. But what we would like to hear anything new that has not been addressed. In order to allow everyone to have an opportunity to speak, there will be a 3-minute time limit for each speaker, and the clerk has a timer for this purpose. We respectfully ask that you adhere to this rule. We also ask at this time that you silence all mobile devices. One other point, when you do come up to speak, please announce your name and your address so we may have that for the record. All that said, we thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to Leanne Martin.
We're going to start with item 1 today. It's minor modification to the conditional use for Lakeland Christian School to amend the school campus master plan to allow for the development of a 5,500 square foot covered play court. Owner, Lakeland Christian School, and the applicant is John A. Kirk. And this is consideration of a final decision.
Hi, good morning. For the record, I'm Philip Scarish, Principal Planner with Community and Economic Development. I apologize for the typo in the ad. It started out as 5,500. The application was for 6,500 square feet, and we reflected that in the staff report and in the conditions. But this is a minor modification of the Lakeland Christian School campus plan. There are no substantive condition changes to the existing conditional use permit. Matt, if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, this is the location, Lakeland Christian School. Here, this is Ariana, obviously Hardin. Pretty much familiar with this site. The applicant proposes a covered play court in this portion of the campus. So this is the master plan that's adopted in the conditional use permit. This is actually 2 things that are changing within the conditions is the overall master site plan, this is the revised one. You can see the 6,500 square foot play court is located here. I just circled it in green for your reference. So that's going to be where it's located on the campus, just next to the existing football field there. So everything is interior. You probably won't even notice it as you're driving by. An aerial version showing the campus area. You can see football field, Ariana, Hardin. You can see this as well interior to the campus. This is an architectural elevation or rendering of the proposed play court. Right here. It's the covered outdoor area. There will be restrooms as well. And this is the attachment D that's in the conditions. This is the only thing that's really changing are the numbers within the school's allocation. So you see here the construction of the play court, 6,500 square feet. It changes their total overall to 309,980, and that's what's just reflected in attachment D of the conditional use. There's no other changes being made here other than the addition of the 6,500 square feet outdoor covered play court. And stand for any questions you may have.
Any questions from the audience? Do I hear a motion?
Board members, I don't know if you wanted to hear from the applicant or their representative, if they had anything to add. I was asking if the applicant had anything to add, and they don't.
I make a motion, we accept the request by the applicant.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thanks. Item 2, minor modification to a planned unit development zoning to modify parking requirements and adopt a site plan for a very high turnover restaurant on property located at the southeast corner of County Line Road and Ralston Road. Owner, Public Supermarkets. Applicant, Bravo Tampa LLC.
Good morning. For the record, Joshua Cheney with Community Economic Development. This PUD was originally approved by the City Commission in September of 2007 for 185,000 square foot of retail space. What we see here are our location maps. The area of change here is on the north side. This PUD was also subject to a minor modification approval by the P&Z Board in November of 2013. That was done in order to make some minor changes to the conditions of approval, as well as modify phasing of transportation improvements. Today, the request before you is a minor modification to the PUD, which would adjust the parking requirements specifically for out parcel B. This site plan that you see before you is out parcel B as the developer is proposing to improve the site. What they're proposing essentially amounts to a reduction in the overall number of parking spaces required, as well as allow for a single row of parking adjacent to the frontage, while also adopting a binding site plan for a 3,950 square foot, very high turnover restaurant on the property, which is located at the southeast corner of County Line Road and Ralston Road. This would be looking to the northeast. This is two of the out parcels located on the north side of the property. Looking to the north, that's County Line Road to your left. Looking to the west, you can see the ongoing construction at this shopping center. And there we have the new Publix that's currently under construction. This was the 2013 site plan that was adopted. As you can see, it shows all 9 tracks, all the out parcels there located along West Pipkin and County Line Road. So as I just mentioned, the applicant is asking for a reduction in the required parking for this site. And let's go back to that site plan so you can, whoops. Again, they're asking for a reduction in the parking. This would reduce the count from the required 63 spaces to 46 spaces. They are doing this based on their experience of operating over 100 Burger Kings in the state, what they're finding, and they have reports that are sales reports that are showing that between 65 and 70% of their customers utilize the drive-through windows rather than dining in. In addition, the applicant also provided a professionally prepared parking study which shows that 5.97 spaces per 1,000 square foot of building area provide adequate parking for their restaurants. So you can see the single row of parking here adjacent to the frontage, and then the parking as proposed. Again, this would be a binding site plan adopted if you were to approve this, included with the PUD. Finally, I would like to note that we did not receive any emails or phone calls regarding this request. And unless you have any questions for me, I'd like to turn it over to the applicant for a brief presentation.
Good morning. My name is Robin Kendall, 3018 US Highway 301, Tampa, Florida. Joshua did a great presentation. We didn't really prepare one. Basically, what we're asking for is to modify the PUD to allow parking along County Line Road, and then the reduction of the required parking spaces. Again, we own and operate over 100 of these stores. We only own and operate one other one in Lakeland. That's on Hardin Boulevard. Hopefully this could be our second one. And we have found through parking studies, through sales, et cetera, that the majority of our business is through the drive-through. And the code requires 60-something spaces. We're providing 46, which is typically about 10 to 15 more than we normally need for a site. So I'm just asking for approval of this. If there's any questions I can answer.
Any questions?
So again, staff is recommending approval. We have some very minor changes to the existing conditions of approval. The two before you, as you can see, have been modified in the strike-through underlined format. So we will add an attachment D, which is the site development plan that you've seen before you today. And then there's also a note here within this last condition that you see before you, essentially recognizing that parking standards will change for out parcel B. And with that, I'll stand for any questions you have. Again, we are recommending approval.
Any questions from the audience? Do I hear a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Item 3, proposed text amendment to update the Lakeland Comprehensive Plan 2010 through 2020 with a new 10-year planning period. Lakeland Comprehensive Plan, Our Community 2030. Applicant, City of Lakeland, and this is consideration of a final decision.
Good morning. For the record, Teresa Mayo with Community and Economic Development Department. This item is one that the board was briefed on at your last meeting, which is the 10-year update to the city's comprehensive plan. We're going to dig a little deeper today, give you more details in terms of the data that is driving this update, and then also some of the minor changes to existing policies within the plan. So with that, we do have a pretty lengthy presentation that Pat Steed with Central Florida Regional Planning Council will make, outlining the new format of the plan and also what the changes are to the document.
Good morning.
Good morning.
For the record, Patricia Steed with Central Florida Regional Planning Council. It's good to be back with you again this month, and as Teresa did share with you, it is a little bit of a lengthy presentation. We know you are quite familiar with the comprehensive plan. We know our community is not necessarily so familiar with it, and one of the goals of the update is we hope this document will be more familiar to our community as we go forward. At our last meeting, we went in quite a bit to the detail of the Lakeland Comprehensive Plan, to the history of planning in Lakeland, which is robust and significant in the development of our community. And so we're just going to start on the highlight of that and not go more into that detail. But back in 1985, the state of Florida put in new requirements for growth management, and with that were the requirements for a new and very robust, detailed, comprehensive plan on behalf of every city and county in the state of Florida. And there does have to be compliance with each of those plans up to the state requirements. Now, the state requirements have changed some since 1985. We had more, we've had less, we've had them modified. And the Lakeland Comprehensive Plan has steadily adopted and stayed not only in compliance, but is one of the shining examples of one of the best plans in the state of Florida. The first one was adopted in 1991. It was then adopted again in the year 2000 and 2010. Lakeland has chosen to do 10-year horizon plans. There are some jurisdictions that have done 20. So the current plan that we are under is covers the years from 2010 to 2020, and so this update will take us to 2030. I just want to remind everyone, and you understand this better than most other than staff and city commission, and that's really that the Lakeland Comprehensive Plan goes hand in hand with the Land Development Code and with the Code of Ordinances. And so they all really work together, and so when you look at a case and when you're considering recommendations, you certainly are looking at all these things, and your staff is as well. And so in regard, though, the comprehensive plan takes the #1 position, so the other ordinances and codes must be in conformance with the comprehensive plan. So that's why the comprehensive plan is a very important part of how the city does its work. In terms of the 2030 update, in general, when we started out working with the city, it was with the idea that the city really wanted a plan that helped focus on its own vision, and the state does encourage that. And as years have gone by, the state's encouragement of that has been stronger, and it's been less telling you exactly what you need to say in your plan, is letting you say what you need to say in your plan in response to your community. So the focus on this update of the plan is on city and community visions. There are no substantive policy changes that are within it. The plan has a major reorganization. Last time, I think I might have brought along my copy that is by the pound of the very large plan that we have today, and then you received a full copy. So it is much smaller in organization. And we're going to talk about the reorganization in detail this morning. It also reduces policy duplication because there were certain policies that were duplicated in various areas of the plan. There's a few of those that remain, but most of those have been eliminated. There are other policies that have been completed, and they were date certain. By a certain date, the city will do something. Well, the city did it, and so therefore that's no longer a relevant policy. Others said that certain things would be included in the Land Development Code or other regulations of the city, and those have occurred, so they don't need to be repeated in the policy. And finally, the real goal was also to make this easier to use and to read for everyone's behalf. Within the plan, and we call it plan guidance, there has been guidance from a number of surveys that were conducted within the community. One is the City Community Values Survey, which the city does itself periodically, and two others that were uniquely being done in tandem at the same time. This is in 2019. One was Look Forward Lakeland, and the community development staff and other city staff conducted that in the community specifically to look at a lot of issues related to comprehensive planning. At the same time, Lakeland Vision, which is the community nonprofit that looks at visioning, was undertaking Our Community, Our Future, Our Vision, which was also another survey being done. And those all happened to occur within a year, and thousands of people were engaged within those. And as those thousands of people were engaged, they were from not only the Lakeland city limits, but also the entire urban planning area So you heard voices in and outside the city that call Lakeland home. And in addition to that, it did represent every zip code, so it was very thoroughly representative of our community. Within that, we also looked to the City Commission, and in their retreats and in their budgeting process, they really detail what their plans and desires are for the city. And so we used the City Commission budget from both 2019 and 2020 as part of that guidance. And then, of course, the reason we have this particular type of comprehensive plan are the state requirements, which are contained in Chapter 163 of Florida statutes. So what did that vision tell us? That is the guidance for this plan. Our city vision is Lakeland, a vibrant, innovative, culturally inclusive, world-class community. Our community vision is Lakeland, a vibrant community of opportunity for a lifetime. And our city mission is Lakeland, a community working together to achieve an exceptional quality of life. These are those three efforts in asking the community what's important to them and in asking different ways and different questions. And some of these things were online, some were in person, some were electronic voting, some were interviews. It was a vast variety of input in different ways from the community. So at Look Forward Lakeland, it looked at what are your highest priorities? And so this is a list of the highest priorities under the community looking from that aspect. The first was business and job creation, housing choices, transportation choices, infrastructure and parks, lakes and environment, community involvement, and culture and history. And as you've seen reflected as you review the comprehensive plan, that's very much the comprehensive plan is about many of those things. And then the community values survey looks at the city's goals, and this is putting the highest value on the different goals that the city has. And one of those, the top one was quality of life, economic opportunity, fiscal management, growth management, and communication. And then finally, in our community vision, there were 4 areas that the community focused on as their most important things in the Lakeland vision, and that is strong and safe neighborhoods, jobs for a vibrant economy, lifelong education, and activities for a diverse community. Within the plan, we look at trends, and I'm just going to start here. We'll actually go back and talk about this a little bit more in land use. But our estimated population, this kind of gives us a look at where we were in 1980. In 1980, we had 47,406 people in Lakeland, and I remember that well, and some of you will too. And then we really hit another growth spurt, as I like to say, and by 1990 we were up to 70,000. And that was through a very efforts of the city and the community to want to grow and bring Lakeland really to its role as a regional, major regional community and city. That growth has continued, and in 2020, the estimate is 109,653. In the projections going forward, this plan is based upon, it's looking at a 2025 population of 356, and then in 2030, it'd be 127,236. So these population estimates become very important because the comprehensive plan needs to plan for how will they accommodate that growth. Because the Lakeland plan is organized both in covering the city limits and in also covering the Lakeland planning area, which makes it unique. There's not a lot of plans that do that. But in doing it, it looks at how much growth do we expect, and an important part of that is because the city does provide major services out in that planning area beyond the city limits, both now and in the future as the city expands. So the 2020 estimated population was 263,794 within the Lakeland planning area, and it's expected to grow in 2025 to over 287,000, and then to the year 2030 to 306,092. So I want to talk a little bit about how the plan is structured. We mentioned this before, that's now organized around chapters instead of just elements. And in this structure, the chapters are vibrant and inclusive community, efficient and well-maintained infrastructure, safe and convenient mobility options, attractive and environmentally friendly community, and responsible and accessible government. Each of the chapters then influences the elements that are contained within that particular chapter. And the things that you will see structured through this is that there's a sidebar, if you would, as each chapter starts that looks at what our guidance is for the individual elements. Some of those are documents, some of them are plans, some are visions, some are regulations, some are policies. There's many things that go into it. Then it looks at our vision for the chapter, and each one of the chapters does have a vision. It then looks at our trends, that is looking at what our current and future resources are and what we'll need. Some of the data that goes with trends are in a separate document that includes data and analysis, and that's known as the technical support resources, and as an available document, but not an adopted part of the plan. It's resource data that ensures that the plan meets those requirements. Then it looks at goals, objectives, and policies, and that really provides the regulatory guidance of the plan. And what you will see is there's a vast difference in the number of policies and the different elements. Some are more complex and need more than others. And then finally, there is a section called the influence on other plan elements, because what's really important is there must be internal consistency within the plan. So the elements have to go together, they have to be work together. And so in many cases, you have one element that does influence other elements in the plan. So that's noted at the end of each chapter. The first of our chapters, again, is called Vibrant Inclusive Community. And our vision for that is strong neighborhoods support our cultural history and our economic future. And in that, there are 4 elements that are organized within there: the future land use element, the housing element, the recreation and open space element. And these have always been elements of the comprehensive plan since its beginning. And then the new element, which is neighborhoods and historic preservation. And as we mentioned last time, this is actually not it doesn't include new policies, but it brings together all the policies that were scattered in the plan and helps put a focus on neighborhoods and historic preservation. So looking at our vibrant inclusive community, these are just a list of some of the things that go into that guidance. Many of these have a lot more than what I've called out on these. Just to give you an idea, they do include not only Florida statutes, but they include like community redevelopment agency plans and certain programs or interlocal agreements like the city may have with Polk County and the school board. Also water management plans or water quality management plans. And other things from the community, such as Livable Polk Healthy Communities Report and Community Health Assessment, which has driven a lot of the policies that have been added through the years. Looking at the trends specifically for the future land use element, the map that you will see there is actually the Lakeland planning area. So if we talk about greater Lakeland or the Lakeland urban area, the Lakeland planning area, generally, for at least for the plan's purposes, this is the area that we're talking about and is a defined area. So the city limits for the city are approximately 75 square miles. That's a little over 48,000 acres. And it's estimated that the year 2020 population that we talked about is 109,000, and by 2030, we're going to be up to 127,000. When we look at the Lakeland planning area, the actual geographic area of that includes 206 square miles, or just under 132,000 acres. And again, with a population forecast that will take us by 2030 to over 300,000 people. As we look at the future land use element, it does include goals, objectives, and policies, and the goal for the comprehensive plan is to provide for the best possible organization of land uses to meet the physical, cultural, and economic needs of the present and future population in a manner that will maintain or improve the quality of the natural and man-made environment. Within the future land use element, it focuses on future land use intensity areas, and we'll look at those in a moment. It also looks at future land use categories, and it has 14 objectives in it, and then there are 80 policies that are organized under those 14 objectives, and this particular one then does have 10 maps that are included within it. I want to look first at the future land use intensity areas. And this was a concept that has actually been around from the very first comprehensive plan when we began to look at our core area, and that the intensity of that we hoped would grow and intensify over time, and certainly we see that it has. And then that the areas that are beyond that and go out to those reaches of the planning area as eventually more and more areas may come into the city limits, that those areas then are less intense in areas. And so then policies and categories are organized with this in mind. So this is a philosophy of the plan that's been there since 1991. The area that you see in orange, or kind of a rust color, that's the Central City Transit Supportive Area. The area outside of that that's shown in yellow is the urban development area, which means that's the area that we see developing into the urbanized type of form over time. And then the suburban area, which is shown in green, that goes out to the edges of the planning area. When we look at the key objectives that we have within the future land use, there are 3 key objectives that I just wanted to point out. There's many, obviously. One is to support a variety of housing types. I don't think we've ever heard that as more important in the community, from all of us dealing with some of the challenges of housing at this point, and really the need for a variety of housing for all ages, all incomes, all preferences of housing types. The other is to promote a high degree of mix of land uses, and the city has really encouraged a mix of land uses. And it's important because also that implements a well-integrated transportation system, and with that you can develop a high level of connectivity in the Central City Transit Supportive Area and the urban development area, and those 2 things you see throughout the plan go together, transportation and land use. And also to ensure land use policies support a vibrant economy and business partnerships, because that is not only key to the success of our community, but it's also key to the success of our planning. I want to point out one thing that's actually in the plan itself. This is on page 2.8 in your plan, and it's called the Future Land Use Summary Table. And I'm going to really if you don't mind, Teresa, ask you to kind of call out or point out anything that you might want to in this. The goal of this was the land use categories, the information on them were lots of text, and they were actually scattered in some different parts of the future land use element. And so really the effort that came to be was to pull all of these things together in a chart that's much easier to follow, puts the things together and makes them clearer. And really the community development staff helped pull together this final version of this format, which I think is very helpful. But I didn't know if you had any questions on that specifically before we move on.
Just for the information of the board and then also the public that may be watching, this entire document is available online on the city's website under the community and economic development pages. There's a tab for planning and zoning and then comprehensive plan. And so this document is out there for the review of the public and then comment as we go into the public hearing process with the city commission.
we don't have any questions at that point beyond that, then we will go ahead and go to the next element that's within our first chapter, and that is the housing element. Again, there is guidance for that from analysis that was done specifically for the housing element, and in addition, certain statutes and requirements. Our trend as we look forward, and one of the things we analyze is the vacant housing units that would be estimated to serve the population. The actual, in 2020, the estimate was 3,713 vacant units. And that if we look at our growth in 2020, we would need, and our persons per household is 2.47 persons per household. So we look at our population growth and we look at how many housing units would be necessary. In that case, it would be 851. So we subtract the 851 from our total vacant units, and that would leave 2,862. And that would look really good, except then we move forward. And by 2025, we're estimating the growth. We will actually need 4,779 new housing units, and of course that would take care of any reserve of any that have been identified as vacant and leave us with a deficit of 1,066 units. So this is a way just to analyze. Yes, we'd have to use up every structure that we have and occupy it in housing and then build in order to keep up with what our needs are. Of course, we know that all units that are vacant will not be used over time. But in 2030, then you can see the demand would be up to 7,969 units, and then that would take us by 2030 of needing additional 4,256 units over that time period. There's a lot of other data that you will find available in the data analysis that looks at housing as well. In terms of looking at the goal for housing, it is to promote the provision of adequate, safe, and affordable housing for existing and future populations, including those with special housing needs. There are 4 objectives and 20 policies that are within the housing element. These are just 3 of the key objectives that are within the housing element. One would be to assist private sector in providing new housing units to ensure housing of various types, sizes, and cost that meet the shelter needs of existing and projected populations. The second would be to eliminate substandard housing conditions through rehabilitation, when possible, or demolition. And then third, support efforts of public-private organizations with innovative housing programs to increase housing availability to very low, and moderate income households. So the housing element really does look inclusively across the community in terms of housing. The next element that's included in the vibrant, inclusive community is recreation and open space. And this used to be, we used to kind of organize that somewhere down the line, but as we know, I think nowhere more so than the city of Lakeland, recreation and open space is such an integral part of when we look at our community and how it operates, and together with our land use as well and our housing. Within this, there's guidance from the city of Lakeland specifically on their pathways plan, adopted parks and recreation master plan, obviously the capital improvements program, the funding and operating and maintaining of parks and recreation, and then very importantly also the guidance of federal requirements on Americans with disabilities. In terms of trends, the city parks level of service standard is set at 5.98 acres per 1,000 residents. So basically what that means is that if we're going to grow, we're going to have to ensure that we continue to have enough parkland available for those future populations. And if you look at this projection, it looks at the park acreage that would be needed from 2020 to 2030. The good news is that as our population grows and that acreage required grows, we still have enough surplus to take care of that in the next 10 years. There may need to be development or redevelopment of some parks, but the actual land that is required, designated to be available for parks, is there to meet that level of service. In terms of looking at our goal, the goal of recreation and open space is to ensure adequate recreation and open space opportunities for all sectors of the community and enhance the quality of life Lakeland offers through the development of attractive parks, recreation facilities, and open spaces. It does have 6 objectives, it has 20 policies, and it does have 3 maps that you will find within it. There are 3 key objectives I'd like to point out. One is to provide supply and variety of recreation opportunities to meet public need. The other is to improve bicycle and pedestrian access to recreation facilities through ongoing implementation of the Lake to Lake Greenway Connector Plan, and also to utilize public investments in right-of-way beautification, street trees, parks, and open spaces to influence existing and future land uses to ensure a vibrant and inclusive community. As y'all all know, this is one of the things in Lakeland we get complimented from our residents and visitors. Going on then to the new element in the plan that's included in Vibrant and Inclusive Community. This is looking at the historic districts and our neighborhoods. And we do have a variety of neighborhood plans over time, and certainly the historic districts are on the National Register. So that's really the guidance that goes into this. There's over 100 geographically defined neighborhoods within the city. Some of you could probably name a good 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Even I would struggle with getting past that probably. These 7 Lakeland historic districts are listed on the National Register of Historic Places and, of course, are well-known and important part of how the city operates to ensure those continue to be the resources they are to the community. And also, Florida Southern College campus is designated as a National Historic Landmark by the U.S. Department of Interior as the largest single-site collection of Frank Lloyd Wright architecture in the world. I'll digress one moment and say I had Swiss graduate architectural and planning students come and do a 3-week thing in Central Florida with us a few years ago, and the number one thing on their list is we must see Lakeland. We must see this site for Frank Lloyd Wright. And it was just about the time that I think all the efforts began to focus on how important it is, so it certainly is world-renowned. Going forward into the organization of it, the goal of the neighborhood and historic preservation is every neighborhood will have a stable quality of life, because from our surveys, that's one of the things that people said the most about their neighborhoods. Looking at this, there are 4 objectives, 28 policies, and 2 maps within that. 2 key objectives I'd like to point out. One would be to strengthen neighborhoods by continuing to implement the city's neighborhood improvement program for older and or declining neighborhoods to promote stability and revitalization of the city's existing neighborhoods. And also develop and revitalize communities that enable residents to live active, healthy lives by providing convenient access to recreational opportunities, to safe, active transportation options, access to nutritious food sources, and increasing age-in-place opportunities as we really have many policies that support age-friendly Lakeland. So that includes the first chapter on vibrant, inclusive community. The second chapter we then focus is on efficient and well-maintained infrastructure. And infrastructure is an element in its own, but it does have categories that fall within that, and so the plan is organized around those required categories. Our vision for the infrastructure element is reliable services support human and environmental health. And with that, we look at potable water, wastewater, solid waste, stormwater management, and protection of surface waters and groundwater aquifers. There are a number of guidance into that. Some of that's from the Water Management District, some of it's from plans that are done county-wide but include Lakeland, such as local mitigation strategies or post-disaster redevelopment plans, and also include the city's plans, such as their water quality management plan and their 10-year water supply plan. In looking at our trends in terms of potable water, 70% of the plant demand that we have on the water utility serves the incorporated area that is within the city limits of the city, and 30% of their water capacity serves the unincorporated planning area outside the city limits. And Lakeland is projected to have available water resources to serve the forecast needs through the year 2030. That is critical, obviously, because water resources is a critical issue in Florida and Central Florida in particular. In addition to that, we look at our trends in wastewater. In wastewater, there are 3 sub-regional treatment plants: the Glendale Water Reclamation Facility, the Northside Wastewater Treatment Plant, and the West Lakeland Pre-Treatment Plant. And available wastewater is also used for power generation at Lakeland Electric facilities, and remaining effluent is channeled to what's known as the 7 wetlands, and that does have an outfall into the Alafia River system. In terms of solid waste, between 2010 and 2020, an average of 5.5 pounds of waste per person per day was collected for disposal by the city. Also, on average, the city collected between 650 to 720 tons of recycled material each month in order to reduce that waste stream into the landfill. In terms of surface water protection, the city has a water quality management plan for priority lakes. I'll mention this one other time as well. Those lakes are Beulah, Bonnet, Bonnie, Crystal, Gibson, Hollingsworth, Hunter, Mira, Morton, Parker, and Wire. And each of these 11 priority lakes was evaluated to verify the impairment status, to identify the nutrient of greatest importance to water quality, and the type of projects that would be required to restore the water quality for those lakes. There are goals for each of those sections of infrastructure. The potable water goal is to provide an adequate supply of high-quality water to customers throughout the service area. The wastewater goal is the City of Lakeland will provide high-quality and economical wastewater service while protecting the environment by preserving water quality. The solid waste goal is the City of Lakeland will manage solid waste in a sanitary, economic, and environmentally safe manner. And the surface water protection goal is the city will manage and protect natural surface water functions to minimize adverse impacts. Again, these are organized around objectives, policies, and maps for each of those areas within infrastructure. Just pointing out a few of the key objectives. For potable water, it would be to identify sources of water that can be used to meet existing and future needs, water supply. Wastewater, the service will only be made available to new development in a manner to promote compact urban area growth, promoting infill development, and discouraging urban sprawl. Solid waste, reduce the amount of solid waste disposed of in landfills in compliance with the Florida Solid Waste Management Act. And the surface water protection goal is to continue to ensure the provision of drainage and stormwater retention to minimize flooding and water quality degradation. So that concludes the efficient and well-maintained infrastructure chapter. The next chapter of the plan is safe and convenient mobility options. And our vision is transportation systems for everyone, everywhere. And the transportation element is now organized into 4 sections. One concentrates on roadways, one concentrates on public transportation, one concentrates on bike, pedestrian, and other transportation modes, and the 4th one looks at the land use and transportation coordination connection. The guidance for this, again, comes from statutes. It also comes from the 2045 Long-Range Transportation Plan that was just adopted by the Polk Transportation Planning Organization in December of 2020. It also looks at the US DOT, Florida Department of Transportation's US 98 corridor access management plan that was completed in 2019. It looks at Lakeland Vision's plan. It also looks at a number of other things that concentrates on rail options and public transit options, but it also focuses quite a bit also on safety, which we'll mention a little bit later. So looking at our trends, the city's connectivity plan includes improving the connectivity of and access really between these modes of transportation so that it provides access to roadway, transit, bicycle and sidewalk facilities, and connectivity to meet local travel demands. And it also really supports the vision for a well-connected multimodal transportation system with appropriate and coordinated land use planning. So those are really two things within the city's plan that's already shaping going forward. Looking at the city's, okay, there we go. These are two maps, and I know on the scale it's very difficult to look at, but these are in your plan and they're available as online resources again for anyone, members of the public or people wanting to look at them. But there's many maps within this plan, and these are all based on those trends and the data and analysis and the current projections. One of these looks at future roadway conditions so that we know what's likely to happen to our roadways over time. So you'll see that's one of the maps that's shown there. And then the other one is the proposed pathways corridor, which we mentioned about the corridors and pathways that really interact with the connectivity plan. And those are detailed as well. So really, those maps are full of all kinds of information that are best looked at on a map, if you would. Looking at then the goal of our safe and convenient mobility options chapter, the goal is to provide a safe, efficient, financially feasible, multimodal transportation system on which fatalities and serious injuries are eliminated. And this is known as Vision Zero goal, which I'll mention in just a minute to tell you what that is, which is responsive to community needs, is consistent with future land use policies, is environmentally sound, and fosters economic vitality. And this chapter is organized in this element. 16 objectives, 119 policies are organized in those 16 objectives, and there are 8 maps that are included within this element. The Vision Zero goal really has come about. Safety is more and more the focus of number one, really from the federal level of transportation to the Florida Department of Transportation state level to the local levels of that being included in the POC 2045 plan and all the Transportation Planning Organization goals and measures, and then finally down to our individual comprehensive plans of the jurisdictions that also do it. We have, for many years, been working on trying to make things safer, and for a number of years, safety was improving both in roadways in Florida, not so much in pedestrian and bicycle. But one of the things is that the actual goal is to eliminate all of those. And of course, you've heard some of the public service announcements that say which of the number that you would choose would be the acceptable people that we would lose to our transportation accidents. And the answer is always none. And so the goal is really at all levels, what can we do to really reverse this trend that we're seeing and make all our transportation systems safer? So that's what Vision Zero is about. Looking at key objectives are in the transportation plan, the roadway transportation, reduce the current number of crashes and the number of crashes per vehicle miles traveled in support of that Vision Zero goal. The public transportation, one of the objectives is to increase mobility through efficient and expanded transit services. One of the objectives for bicycle, pedestrian, and other transportation modes is the linear feet of routes for non-motorized travel shall increase as gaps in extension of sidewalks and bike lanes are constructed. And then that land use and transportation coordination that we talk about and the plan really concentrates on, to plan and implement transportation investments that are appropriate for surrounding land use designations and context districts, and to provide safe and efficient options that contribute to the vibrancy of Lakeland. The next chapter is known as Attractive and Environmentally Friendly Community. And our vision for this chapter is magnificent lakes support our natural resources. And the conservation element concentrates in 3 areas. 1, lakes is a priority, protection of habitat, and protection of natural resources. Again, there's guidance from statute and regulations, and also the city's natural resource protection regulations themselves. In terms of our trend, the city has a water quality management plan for priority lakes. And this is really a major plan that really has looked at the details of what it would take to improve and maintain the quality of water and the habitats that they support with those lakes. And as I mentioned, those lakes include Beulah, Bonnet, Bonnie, Crystal, Gibson, Hollingsworth, Hunter, Mira, Morton, Parker, and Wire. And there are 3 conservation efforts that have aided in the water utilities conservation area efforts. Because as we talked about, water supply is one of our most critical issues in Florida and in Central Florida for the future. And so part of that has got to be centered around also doing everything we can to conserve our water and to have policies that do that. And some of the ways that the city has going forward is to look at irrigation of our public recreation area around Lake Morton. It was converted from potable water source to lake water, and there may be other options to do that. Also looking at Florida-friendly landscaping wherever possible, both in their own investment in the city-owned areas, and also in encouraging that in all ways as it's installed privately. And also looking at the investigation of shallow aquifer wells as a source of irrigation water that could be used in major parks throughout Lakeland. There are many, many conservation objectives that you will find actually in the plan that center on this as well. You also find some of those in the potable water section. In terms of our goal for our attractive, environmentally friendly community, it is to conserve, restore, and manage natural resources to preserve and enhance their quality for future use. And in this chapter, there are 6 objectives, 35 policies, and 4 maps. And a couple of the key objectives that you will find in the attractive and environmentally friendly community section. Minimize or mitigate flood hazard in future development proposals, continue to protect and conserve wetlands and wetland areas, and ensure that development approved in flood-prone areas is consistent with the functions of the natural systems in that area. And then another objective is continue to implement measures to protect and improve the ambient air quality, to preserve Lakeland and Polk County status as an air quality attainment area as designated by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. As you know, many areas within the country cannot really enjoy the air quality that we have in our area, and it's important that we do things to make sure that continues. Our next chapter, one more key objective. This is to continue to work with state government, county government, and adjacent local governments and involved landowners to establish green belts which conserve natural resources and our habitats, and which provide open space relief from development. And Lakeland has had basically the plan to help provide a green belt around the city as part of its planning area fabric since its first plan. So it's something that everyone has worked towards over time. Moving now to our final chapter related to the elements themselves, and this is responsible and accessible government. And our vision for that is to maintain financial stability while providing for growth and redevelopment. And there's 3 elements that are contained within this chapter. Those are the intergovernmental coordination element, the public school facilities element, and the capital improvement element. And the guidance for these comes from a number of other plans and other agencies, and those include the Polk Transportation Planning Organization. It also includes the Water Management District related to the Regional Water Supply Plan. It includes what's known as the Florida Inventory of Schoolhouses, which really sets the requirement in the public schools element. Looks at then, as we look at funding of projects, looks at the Florida Department of Transportation's 5-year work program, looks at the Polk County School Board's 5-year work program, and then, of course, it looks at the City of Lakeland and both their interlocal agreement with the Polk County School Board and the city's own capital improvement program. In looking at our trends, Lakeland participates in intergovernmental coordination efforts that include water and wastewater service area planning. It also looks at electric service area, public school facilities coordination, and cooperative development review agreements. So the good news is the policies and overall procedures of the city ensure that they're interacting with their neighbors, that where things are going to influence one another, those things are underway. And in the case of the public school facilities coordination, the actual planning for that is included all the cities and the county and the school board together in that effort. And in 2004, the state of Florida developed a certification program, and they acknowledged that Lakeland's comprehensive plan meets certain standards as defined in the Florida statutes. Lakeland is one of the very few cities, I believe we can count them on less than my fingers, in the state that has ever received a certification for doing that. And part of the reason for that certification is that level of coordination that they establish within the Lakeland planning area, within their neighbors, and it is this coordination level along with the plan itself and the administration of that plan that has brought them and maintained that certification even to today. One of the things that they do is to really look at their adopted level of service standards. Many of these adopted level of service standards, the city has met their goal of being less than, particularly in potable water, but it is set as 150 gallons per capita per day. In terms of wastewater, it's 128 gallons per capita per day. Solid waste, we mentioned, was 5.5 pounds per capita per day. Drainage is 25-year frequency, 24-hour storm event, and then the recreation and open space was the 5.98 acres per 1,000 residents. So looking at the goal that goes along with the intergovernmental coordination element, it is to improve governmental efficiency and effectiveness and resolve conflicts and incompatibility through cooperation, communication, and flexible relationships between Lakeland and all other government organizations which share common interests and issues. It has 7 objectives, it has 40 policies, and it has 2 maps. Some of the key objectives within the intergovernmental coordination element, one is to share information and seek intergovernmental agreements with appropriate governmental entities, including independent special districts, to improve intergovernmental coordination and collaborative planning. Another is to support the creation and implementation of a cohesive vision for the Central Florida Innovation District, together with the City of Auburndale and Polk County, to realize a dense mixed-use area that builds upon the major economic development drivers surrounding Florida Polytechnic University. Another is to coordinate changes and establish level service standards, including 10-year updates to the comprehensive plan and 5-year updates to the long-range transportation plan. The next element that's within this chapter is the public school facilities element. And as we mentioned, all of the cities, this is a plan set forward with the requirements that the state of Florida has, not only in comprehensive planning, but also for its public schools. And then cooperatively, each of the local governments incorporate this within their comprehensive plan. That group does coordinate. They just had a meeting recently, and this is an ongoing coordination effort on all the local governments' part, working with the school board. So there are a number of goals within this. The others are all organized where there's one goal or one goal per topic. This particular element has quite a few goals. So here's a couple of those key goals. To coordinate with the Polk County School Board and other jurisdictions to ensure quality educational facilities and superior educational opportunities, which in turn encourages economic growth for individuals, families, and communities in Lakeland and Polk County. It also, one of the goals is to implement public school facilities concurrency uniformly with other local jurisdictions to ensure the availability of public school facilities consistent with an adopted level of service, providing adequate school capacity and eliminating overcrowding conditions in existing and future schools. And of course, that's been a tremendous and ongoing challenge here in the county and in the Lakeland area. Looking at some key objectives that then go along with these goals, encourage partnerships that will ensure adequate educational facilities, which in turn will encourage economic growth and provide for a trained and stable labor force, resulting in a higher quality of life. Even though we've had an interesting past year, having an adequate labor force for the future is one of the challenges that we are anticipating going forward. Another one of the key objectives is to enhance community and neighborhood design through effective school educational facility design, school siting standards, compatibility with surrounding land uses, schools as focal points for community planning, and making schools a central component geographically or otherwise to neighborhood level planning. This plan has 17 objectives, 95 policies, and there are 2 maps that are included within that. The next part of our chapter on responsible and accessible government looks at the capital improvements element. And this is, the goal is the City of Lakeland will take actions necessary to adequately provide needed public facilities and services concurrent with the impacts of development. This will be done in a manner which protects investments in and maximizes the use of existing facilities while promoting orderly, compact urban growth. And there are 4 objectives and 19 policies within that. One of the key objectives, a couple of key objectives are land use decisions and other decisions regarding the issuance of development orders and permits will be based on the development requirements of this plan, land development regulations, and availability of public facilities and services necessary to support such development while maintaining adopted level of service standards. And that's very much that linkage of concurrency with development approval to ensure there's the services to support it. Another key objective is the future development will bear a proportionate cost of facility improvements necessitated by development to maintain adopted level of service standards. For capital improvements that will be funded by the developer, financial feasibility shall be demonstrated by being guaranteed in an enforceable development agreement or interlocal agreement or other foreseeable, enforceable agreement. The city also helps support their capital improvements element with their impact fee program, which is tied to levels of service as well. As we mentioned last time, the things that are new to the comprehensive plan is a chapter on definitions, and that chapter is chapter 7, and it's really intended to assist the reader because we know there's lots of planning terms and terms that you find in the plan that might not be readily recognized by some, and there's lots of acronyms for things, so we've helped define that. In the capital improvements element, there is now an appendix which includes the capital projects that would be needed to ensure the vision and policies of the plan are funded. Those you will find listed in this appendix. Those projects are the ones that have been identified already in the City Commission approved capital improvement program, but that are directly related to the comprehensive plan. And then there is the data and analysis that we discussed, and there's, I'm going to say it's robust, probably 500 pages worth of data and analysis. Some looks at historic things in previous plans. Some is specific on the new analysis, calls out other plans. And that's now known as the Technical Support Resources document. So with that, that is a walk through the new comprehensive plan to be known as Our Community 2030. I'd be happy to answer any questions, or of course, community development staff is here for you.
In the plan, have you addressed green infrastructure at all? And I know through Central Florida, St. Pete, Orlando, Tampa, they're all taking steps to address green infrastructure to reduce CO2 emissions and really creating sustainability initiatives and plans. Has this comprehensive plan started to look at any of that?
I would say that there are goals that generally would support green infrastructure, but it's not specific to calling out objectives to achieve that. So I think, you know, this is a living document. It's meant to be amended over time because obviously things will change within that 10-year horizon. So I think one of the things that we will look at is that specifically, and also resiliency and sustainability, all of those things that are at the forefront now in planning and design realm. So not specifically, but we will take a look at that as being appropriate to adopt at a future time through a text amendment. And we'll probably come through with some amendments, I would think, next year after we get through the adoption of this overhaul.
You have a question?
Sitting on this board for a very limited time, what I have been observing is most of the concerns of the citizens that come in here and speak have to do with traffic and stormwater. Those seem to be the hot buttons. And time after time, when these large developments are talked about, that's what it is. We all appreciate how we need housing in this community, and low-income housing. What does the city propose to do proactively as opposed to reactively with this situation? And I guess what I'm saying is, before we decide to allow a developer to do some huge development, why are we not doing the infrastructure with roads and stormwater runoff to accommodate that? So we don't wait till the impact is so horrific to take care of it. Is that addressed in the plans at all?
It is. So I believe that Ms. Steed had referred to level of service several times in the presentation. And so for every infrastructure piece that the city maintains, there is what we call an adopted level of service. That's the minimum required. So when we're talking about new development, when new development is coming in for review, they need to demonstrate that they are not impacting that level of service. And if they do impact that level of service, then they need to provide some type of mitigation for that. So, transportation, of course, the biggest that you mentioned that we hear from quite a bit. So that could be anything from, additional lanes, or that's not always the case, transit improvements. And that's why you have, Chuck here as an advocate when we do have those projects that have difficulty meeting that level of service, offering up different options. And again, this is it's no longer the transportation element, it's the mobility, to really enforce the concept of it's not just about cars on roads all the time. So the same goes for stormwater, the same goes for water. All of those different infrastructure pieces need to be looked at when you have proposals come to you. And so the staff doesn't bring forward to you a recommendation for approval unless we are confident that any conditions that are being recommended mitigate for any impacts that project may have. But on the proactive side, so we know traffic today is, people I hear anecdotally all the time, well, it's getting worse, traffic here is so terrible, which is, it's true, but comparatively, if you look at other cities, we're probably not as bad as others. But that's again where organizations like the Polk Transportation Planning Organization and our own city team of, Chuck on the planning side and then others on the public works side, look at getting funding and making sure that we are addressing current needs and deficiencies separate from those developments that are coming forward. So we are looking at it proactively, and I don't know if Chuck had anything to add to that in terms of what he does and what the city does on a daily basis to ensure that.
Good morning. For the record, Chuck Barmby, Community and Economic Development. I would say also one of the other things that we do on a proactive basis, actually two things. If you look at our level of service standards and the different development areas that we have throughout the city, we have, like the central city is a good example, where we do allow roads to technically exceed the general capacity if those mobility options are available for transit, bicycle, pedestrian in particular. So in working with the Citrus Connection, the TPO, other agencies, that's where we look at their plans and try to figure out when a new development comes in that may not necessarily meet the city's roadway standards. We then go back and look at the other mobility options that are out there that are available, that are in other adopted plans, and use that as the kind of our starting point to negotiate mitigation requirements for that development. And so we're really proactive and really drawing from the other data, the other analysis, and using our level of service standards and the flexibility that's allowed to give a better mitigation package that ultimately meets the community's needs, meets the development's needs, and is something that's sensitive to the area. We don't, like for US 98 North of Memorial Boulevard, at one time that was going to be a 6-lane roadway, which would have divided the community. It really wouldn't have solved the congestion issues or the mobility issues. And so we were able to, like working with the hospital or Watson Clinic and others, to put together a package that actually meets the overall community's needs. So we're not creating a scar or a divide in the neighborhood because of a one-size-fits-all type mentality. Southwest Lakeland's another area that has been a very kind of big focal point for us. We've got somewhere between 4,000 or 5,000 new dwelling units that are under some type of development right now, depending on if you include Oak Ridge or not. And we, again, go back and default to our comprehensive plan and the long-range plan that actually show different connector roads that link the individual developments together. So we're taking pressure long-term off of County Line Road, Pipkin Road, Drainfield, and others by using some of these other connections that may not today look like much or may not even exist today, but we're stitching together other routes to give people a way to get around a rapidly growing area. So for that, we've worked very closely with the development with Riverstone, now Hawthorne Mill coming behind it, to extend Modelo Road to connect those two developments ultimately down to Ewell Road. But as part of that cross-section, we're going to have a sidewalk on one side, a multi-use trail on the other side. The multi-use trails are part of our pathways plan and actually tie into transit in a new route that's established on Pipkin Road to the new shopping center that Joshua talked about earlier. And through a development agreement with Riverstone, they're paying for 5 years of transit service to enhance that transit route, in addition to the pathways and everything that's happening on their site. So I think we're being proactive and trying to get out as much as we can ahead of these issues, recognizing that these developments, where 10 years ago we were looking at 300-400 unit developments, now we're in 12, 13, 1,500 unit developments, and so the scale has gone up, but the plans have been in place, and this goes back when Pat was planning manager here in the 90s, that those plans have carried forward. Those lines on the maps that were just those lines on a map that not long ago are now being developed and implemented with this large development that was planned 25 years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Chuck, you mentioned all these plans that we have within the community. It seems to me so much of what we're looking at here, and it's not pie in the sky, but it's almost, you have to have that kind of attitude. This is where we hope to be. How much of it, though, are we dependent on other communities, other municipalities, the state, and so forth, to cooperate with us to try, particularly in transportation and other areas? And yet there seems to be an attitude of, let's protect our own turf. I'm not talking about us, I'm talking about other areas, and we're the big guys, so, you have to suffer a little bit.
I would say in Polk County that, I've worked in other parts of the state, and I have never experienced the type of cooperative nature that we have here in Polk County. I mean, we've got 17 jurisdictions in the county, ranging from Lakeland certainly being the biggest to communities that have 200 residents. And through groups like the TPO and understanding that, there's only so much federal and state funding that's available to the county on any, 1 or 5 year basis, that we have to share in those funds. And so I think that whereas a long time ago there was an east-west divide in the county, and it was about turf, and it was about, over the past 20 years, it's really kind of come together, and it's been, okay, Lakeland will get the in-town bypass, and that will be funded, and then Winter Haven will get State Road 542. Meanwhile, the state will make investments on 98 or 27 on some of its corridors, and so the money is being spent around the county and in the area. And so everybody, you may not get the project you want today, but you will be in the pipeline to get those investments down the road. But that gets into a big issue that we have in terms of funding, and that the city of Lakeland can only generate so much through impact fees. That's got to be proportionate to the development impact and the cost of the facilities the impact fees would be using to spend on new growth. The legislature really kind of limits what local governments can do in terms of generating revenue and providing those revenue choices to its residents. The amount of revenue that's available, and this is both a state and federal issue in terms of gas tax, is that the transportation trust funds at the state and federal levels aren't solvent anymore. And that mechanisms that were good back in the 70s and 80s just really aren't applicable anymore. The rise in electric vehicles, for example, we're starting to see a drop in gas tax revenue, even though you've got more vehicles that are on the roadway system. So how do we make up that difference? And so we're extremely reliant on larger agencies, state and federal levels, that are still working on funding schemes from days gone by, and they're not as nimble or as able to react and address current transportation needs, and that trickles down to us in limited amounts of funds that are available for roads like New Tampa Highway or State Road 33. These are projects that have been, and I'll go back, Bartow Road. My second day with the Polk TPO in 1994, I heard a presentation on the PD&E study, the alignment study for US 98 by Lakeland High School. Absolutely nothing's happened since then in 28 years. And it's been a function of the federal and state funding isn't keeping up. And so that's where we need some big ideas from other agencies from which we rely to make a lot of these big road projects and transportation, big transportation investments, high-speed rail or Sunrail, be real in our community. And so I think locally, we do an extremely good job of working with our neighbors and working together. We're reliant on a state and federal system that is not keeping up with changes in transportation trends. And ultimately, to have those huge investments in our community, we need to figure something out. And we need Tallahassee and Washington to help us be part of that solution.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience at all? Any other questions from the board? Thank you very much for your presentation. Oh, I'm sorry. Go on, Chuck.
Only because Chuck brought it up, but you talked about Sunrail and high-speed rail. Is there any additional guidance or forethought into those in this plan? from what was in previous plans.
I would say there were existing policies supportive of that, and Chuck, I thought that there was a modification to one of those to specifically call out Sunrail.
That's exactly, and that's a great question, and that gets back into our Central City Transit Supportive Area. We do have language that talks about, we've heard studies of the Lakeland Intermodal Center. Tonight, there'll be a public meeting on the US 98 Bus Rapid Transit Study that's under development by DOT, and that's all about linking a potential intermodal center near the RP Funding Center that would serve as a western terminus for Sunrail coming out of Orlando. And so that's been part, there's some policy language of coordinating all those different studies to focus in on a transportation node in the downtown area and connecting that node to a future high-speed rail stop somewhere up along I-4 US 98 area. And so we do have policies, and it draws onto a lot of analysis and work that's been done by other agencies, with the city being at the table to put those pieces together. But I think the other thing too is Brightline, probably the first opportunity we have for high-speed rail coming out of Orlando towards us in Tampa. It's going to be Brightline, and we are going to need to keep an eye on that to make sure that Lakeland does continue to get a stop. I think Brightline is just focused on Orlando International to Disney and then to Tampa. And there's a commitment at the state level to provide a high-speed rail station in Lakeland. And it doesn't talk about the vendor, it's just there's a commitment there. So if we have, if the state and Brightline are using I-4's, the public right-of-way in the median of I-4, we need to have a stop. It doesn't matter, we can get the infrastructure in. It's a matter on how that system is served, and that's a whole different issue. But our plans that we're doing here, are being developed here locally are going to try to make that as attractive as possible and at least make the infrastructure a reality.
Anybody else? Thank you very much for the presentation. Appreciate it. Okay.
So,
Here's
board
that
members,
ends the
Sorry, looking at the schedule, if there are no other comments, or questions to point out that the next step would be the City Commission public hearing on this item, but in order for this to get to City Commission, you would need to take action today to recommend that it be approved, the draft, and that it go on to City Commission.
Next step for our board to recommend.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, to recommend to the City Commission.
Yeah, we need to, I make a motion to pass the Lakeland Comprehensive Plan on to City Commission.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
Item 4, review the minutes of the February meeting.
Trust everyone's had an opportunity to review those minutes. So a motion to accept them as written. Changes both by anybody, any errors in there.
Make a motion to accept the minutes from the prior meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Item 5, change in land use from residential medium to community activity center, and a change in zoning from O1 low impact office and RA3 single family residential to PUD plan unit development to allow limited C4 community center commercial uses and O1 uses on approximately 5.77 acres generally located west of US Highway 98 South, north of Richmond Road and south of Fredericksburg Avenue. Owner, 1723 US Highway 98 South LLC. Applicant, Shelton Rice.
Good morning, Matthew Lyons, Community Economic Development. As you should note on the slide, the applicant is requesting a 1-month delay. They notified us yesterday that they had some differences of opinion regarding our recommendation, and they wanted additional time to consider their options, so they are requesting an additional month. So if you'd like to consider that, you may do a motion and a vote.
They need an additional month.
Yes, sir.
I'll make the motion to approve a 1-month delay for this item to the next meeting.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Item 6, change in land use from mixed commercial corridor to residential medium on approximately 7.75 acres. A change in zoning from MF12 multifamily residential to PUD plan unit development on 10 acres, and the application of PUD zoning on approximately 46.1 acres, concurrent with a city-initiated context district change from suburban corridor to suburban neighborhood on approximately 7.75 acres, to allow up to 209 single-family detached dwellings and 2 commercial nodes on property located east of Lake Parker, north of State Highway 92 East, and west of Fairway Avenue. Owner, John A. Causey Revocable Trust. Applicant, Sarah Case.
Good morning again, Matthew Lyons, Community Economic Development. This case came before you last month, and you will recall the subject property is located at the southeastern shore of Lake Parker. And it's currently vacant use as pasture. Historically, it was the Lakeland Country Club and the golf course back in the 1920s. And more recently, it was used for mobile home, storage essentials, a liquor store, and outdoor advertising. All those uses have since been terminated and any structures removed. And the property is bounded by the Ralston natural gas plant to the west. And the south, industrial uses. To the southeast, you have retail commercial on US 92. And to the east, northeast, you have county single-family residential uses. That would be part of the Lake Parker, West North Cumbie, North neighborhood. And so just to recap, the subject property was annexed into the city on June 18, 2012. Prior to that time, it had a county designation of RL4, residential low, on 48.05 acres, and 9.1 acres of Polk County LCC linear commercial corridor along US 92. And on January 22, 2013, the city did apply the following future land use designations to the property: 12.03 acres of MCC along US 92 East. See right here. And the request there did increase the corners there, so they were a little bit larger than they were in the county. I'll go into that later on. And 9.76 acres of conservation on the shore of Lake Parker. And the remainder of the site was designed RM, that would be 34.98 acres located to the north here and east of East Lake Parker Drive. The changes that were applied at that time, as I indicated, they did reduce the overall residential land use by converting just under 10 acres to conservation. That land was essentially undevelopable. And slightly deepening the 2 commercial nodes at the corner there. The increase in commercial was done consistent with the Lake Parker plan, which I'll go into in a moment, to allow for development of the property as a mixed-use residential and non-commercial type development. And at that time, there was a market study prepared that supported the combination of commercial and residential uses as being appropriate to accommodate a business requiring high visibility and access to the major road that works next door there. So in 2015, the subject property was included as part of the East Lake Parker West North Cumbie Area Plan. I touched on this last month. That was a collaborative plan developed in coordination with the Central Florida Regional Planning Council, Polk County, the City of Lakeland, and other community stakeholders, including the current property owner. And in that plan, the subject property was identified as a catalyst site and a key redevelopment opportunity, which could potentially bring substantial economic, social, and environmental benefits for the community. In that plan was intensive uses such as multifamily residential dwellings, independent living, assisted living facilities, community services, and recreation and open space were all located within the interior of the site, while the frontage along US Highway 92 East was envisioned as a mixture of office, medical office, and neighborhood scale retail commercial uses. So the request before you today is to obtain land use and zoning to allow for the development of a single-family residential subdivision with a maximum of 209 single-family detached dwelling units. And to allow the project to move forward, the application is requesting to reduce the MCC land use along 92 by 7.75 acres, along with a corresponding increase in the residential medium land use. And to allow for the development, the PUD zoning would be applied to the entire 56.1 acre tract, including the 9.76 acre portion along Lake Parker, currently designated as conservation. And concurrent with this request, the city, if approved, would change the context designation of the 7.75 acres along 92 East from suburban corridor to suburban neighborhood. And I'll go through a few slides here. This is a photo of the property looking to the northeast from Highway 92. And this is a photo looking to the northwest. And you can see the Ralston natural gas power plant. And going around Lake Parker Drive East, this is looking to the northeast. You get a good view of the site, the pasture, the trees there. The site is quite flat, as you can see from the photos. And then you have a view looking to the northwest, across Lake Shore and the Lake Parker. You can see the McIntosh power plant off there in the distance. Okay, so on the screen here we have the proposed, this is what you saw last month, subdivision here. The bulk of the property would be for the residential uses, with the exception of the two small nodes at the northeast corner of East Lake Parker Drive and the northwest corner of Fairview Avenue and East Highway 92. Those would be left for future commercial development. Okay, going into staff's recommendation here, this property is located within the suburban neighborhood context district. That designation is intended for development of suburban residential areas at a low to moderate density with a relatively large block structure and a low to moderately walkable environment that requires primarily vehicular mobility and limited connectivity. The suburban neighborhood district, however, may transition to a more walkable urban form with smaller blocks, greater connectivity, and a higher density when it is adjacent to and incorporated as part of the design of a sort of mixed-use project in which you have options for shopping, worship, school, gathering, basically being your basic needs there. If you want to have a more integrated type of design, it would allow for higher density there, particularly when you're on a transit-oriented corridor like 92 here. Under the current land use and context classification, the suburban neighborhood, if it were zoned by right for single family, would require a minimum lot width of 60 feet, a minimum lot size of 7,000 square feet, and a minimum rear yard depth of 20 feet. As submitted by the applicant, the proposed PUD would allow 40-foot wide lots with a minimum lot size of 4,800 square feet and a minimum rear yard depth of 10 feet. To comply with the Land Development Code's requirement for civic open space, the applicant is also proposing to set aside a total of 1.93 acres. That would be tracts F, G, and H as active open space for residents. Early in the development process, staff did meet with the applicant to discuss concerns about the proposed design, as it does represent a substantial deviation from the previous plan, which envisioned a mixed-use project, and also with the land development code. Initially, the applicant proposed to rezone the entire 2,000-foot length of the frontage along US 92 East to residential. However, that was later revised to preserve the corners discussed earlier. In regards to these two commercial nodes, the applicant has not specified any type of development plan or vision which would ensure that the future development of these two nodes is complementary and compatible with the proposed residential development and the surrounding uses. As part of that meeting, staff also suggested that the applicant consider the development of a sustainable building typology that would be appropriate for a subdivision composed entirely of 40-foot lots, and also to address the challenges associated with narrow lots, such as parking and the minimal amount of yard space. To compensate for the smaller lot size, lot width, and rear yard area, staff suggested that new house plans be developed with smaller garages and enhanced entry feature. In response, the applicant countered that this would only serve to increase construction cost, and that according to their understanding of the market, the buyers prefer homes with front-loaded two-car garages. A typical two-car garage at 22 feet in width would provide insufficient room to provide an enhanced entrance feature on a 30-foot wide plan, which would be the maximum you could fit on a 40-foot lot. Additional concerns include the need to provide vehicular access to and from Fairway Avenue, and the reduction or elimination of the cul-de-sacs in accordance with the Land Development Code to improve connectivity both internally and externally. Following the submittal of the application, staff continued to meet with the applicant to discuss these concerns pertaining to connectivity, lot size, yard size, the design of the units, the loss of the commercial frontage, and the appearance of the development from US 92. Staff raised the issue of the lot size as the rear yard setback and dimensions were not typically allowed in the suburban area. As an option, staff did suggest that the applicant consider redesign the lot layouts such that at least half of the lots were a minimum of 50 feet in width. At the time that the staff report was written, the applicant had not responded or made any changes that address that concern. Staff also reviewed 6 sets of elevations and floor plans that were proposed for the development. I believe these were shown to you last month. We have them here. We'll go through them in a few minutes. None of these designs proposed for the development, which all include 2-car front-loaded garages and minimal entrance features, meet the minimum design standards within the Land Development Code. The only modification that they made to the plan was the provision of a vehicular access point to Fairway Avenue, which you can see down here. Aside from that, another change was the relocation of a trail to the East Lake Parker east side of the road. This was to address an underground natural gas transmission line, which precluded it being on the west side of the roadway. Finally, the applicant also did include a rendering of a proposed buffer wall along 92 to address the visual appearance of development from that frontage. In regards to the comprehensive plan, the MCC land use category, That's the commercial frontage along NA2. Generally, it consists of 9-acre retail and service areas that lack controlled centers, sometimes too small or otherwise inappropriate for shopping. These types of commercial corridor areas are generally characterized by businesses that need high visibility and driveway access. Residential uses may be allowed in NCC, but only within a mixed-use configuration, either horizontal or vertical, so they would not be allowed as a standalone use. The RM land use categories tended for the central city transit supportive area, the urban development area, and the suburban area. While both residential medium and residential low future land use designations cannot be applied to corridors, historically, they've all been applied to non-commercial corridors. Examples would be West Pipkin Road, State Road 33, in which the non-residential uses are generally limited and concentrated in designated activity centers, or on legacy corridors such as US Highway 98 South. So on the screen, you have a slide showing the proposed typical layout. As discussed, they would be proposing a 10-foot rear yard setback. Excuse me. A 5-foot side setback and a 22 front setback. And I'll let Mr. Barmy go through the transportation portion here.
Good morning. For the record, Chuck Barmy, Community Economic Development Department. One of the things that we've discussed with the applicant and we know is forthcoming, but we still need to see, is a basic analysis of the expected trip generation of the proposed residential and commercial uses. From that, we would be able to define more specific transportation conditions, not only and I don't think concurrency is necessarily an issue, but we would want to make sure that we have the appropriate conditions for the intersections of US 92 and East Lake Parker Drive, Fairway, make sure we have the appropriate transit conditions, and certainly the bike trail on the frontage was one of the major conditions that has been addressed to date. But we still need to see those traffic numbers to at least provide us with the necessary conditions for mitigation, so that when it's time for the final concurrency determinations at either the final plat or site plan approval, that's pretty well laid out for us, and we're not limited in terms of what those mitigation requirements are. So with that, I'll stand for any questions on transportation.
Any questions?
Okay, and we've got a few slides I want to show you just about the housing units. These are the 6 malls they're proposing at the 2 per side. They have a 1-story unit. As you can see, the garage is the predominant feature, with a single doorway to the west, minimal transparency and otherwise detail on the elevation. And second side shows similar house on the left, and then they have a 2-story model on the right side there. The only glazing would be on the second floor. And last page is similar 2-story structures with minor changes to facade, but basically the same massing and house there. And here's the rendering that the applicant provided, showing for a buffer concept along US Highway 92 East. And as far as our recommendation, it's on page 7 in your packet. The applicant's justification for this request is their belief that there's a high demand for housing at the price point for these units, and that no other developers have expressed interest in the property. while the applicants intend to market the homes to as workforce housing for first responders, teachers, nurses, and first-time homebuyers is laudable, staff finds that the proposed development is compatible with both the comprehensive plan and the land development code. Rather than promote design and innovation that provides qualitative improvement over normal design standards as intended by the LDC, the proposal seeks PUD zoning only as a means to circumvent the minimum code provisions. First, the PUD consists entirely of a conventional subdivision with 40-foot lots and 10-foot rear yard setbacks. As discussed before, the proposed lot size, lot width, and setbacks are well below the minimum standards for the suburban neighborhood context district. And inconsistent with the land development code, in that greater density can only be considered through a walkable design incorporates the design and planning of housing with nearby facilities such as schools, churches, recreational activities, commercial, retail, and services. Second, the suburban neighborhood context specifies a maximum block length of 700 feet for block faces. While most of the blocks comply with this requirement, the two perimeter blocks located south of Road 2 will be here, and Road 3, they exceed that limit. And cul-de-sacs, other street terminations are generally prohibited except when there are physical barriers such as limited access highways, railroads, canals, or wetlands that would otherwise prohibit connectivity, or where street connections cannot be made due to existing development. Third, the proposed home designs, again, which include two-car front-loaded garages and minimal entrance features, they're essentially indistinguishable from the type of narrow lot house plans you can find anywhere in Polk County and Central Florida. They're not any intent to really kind of create a special or unique community that would be appropriate for what they're asking for here. And while the applicant's plan does reserve 2 small nodes for future commercial development, 70% of the frontage is designated as housing with a rear yard of 31 lots being directly adjacent to the heavily traveled commercial industrial corridor. The residential feature land use designation has not historically been applied in such context when you're mixed with commercial industrial uses. And approval of this request would establish a precedent for allowing similar land use patterns in the future. We did receive comments from some of the neighbors. Excuse me. Let me read those for you on there. Prior to and following the public hearing, we received emails and phone calls from adjacent property owners. 2 property owners were opposed to the request based on increased traffic, the perception that it will bring drugs and crime to an area that is already economically distressed and suffers from a large number of rental properties. That would be the neighborhood to the immediately to the east from Fairway Avenue. We did, however, receive one property owner who spoke in favor of the request, a younger gentleman stating he thought it would bring much needed affordability and housing options for first-time home buyers, but he was concerned about allowing access from Fairway Avenue. So our recommendation, the bottom of page 7, page 8. We are recommending that the request be denied without prejudice due to the noncompliance with the comprehensive plan and the land and development code for the reasons stated previously, and allow the applicant to the opportunity to revise and consider a more integrated mixed-use type plan that, one, would maintain the entire US 92 frontage as MCC land use, two, avoid the use of cul-de-sacs, and three, more importantly, consider a sustainable building typology appropriate for narrow lots that would limit garage width and provide an entrance feature more conducive to a neighborhood. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions? Okay. Now, we've already done, this is no longer part of our public hearings now, so it's up to the board to.
We have, yes, Mr. Chairman, we have heard from the applicant, but I do believe the applicant's representative is here, and based on all the comments from staff, it may be appropriate to give them a brief rebuttal to the recommendation.
Okay.
Good morning. For the record, Sarah Case. I'm with Econ South. Our address is 6700 South Florida Avenue here in Lakeland. With me today is Mr. Causey, the property owner, as well as Jenny Burris and Brent Burris, and John McVeigh, also with Econ. I do have some handouts. Again, I had my presentation this time last month. I'm not going to make you go through that again. Staff had a very efficient presentation to you this morning, but there are some hard copy handouts I would like to provide. I have one for everyone and for staff as well. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Lyons, for your staff report. Obviously, it is disappointing that we have a recommendation of denial. This is an unusual circumstance because of the location of the site. We have McIntosh Power Plant, Ralston, on one side, an industrial use, and we have a blighted community on the east side, and we have industrial across from Memorial. So while you did get some history of the site from staff, I want to kind of explain a little bit of my involvement with it as well. I began working with Mr. Causey in 2012 when we did a voluntary annexation agreement into the city and applied land use at that time. And at that time, we had LCC land use in the county and RL4, as staff indicated, residential low, up to 4 units per acre on the balance of the site. So in working with community development, and Celeste Deerdorf was here at the time, we took a look at the LCC land use that was a strip. Linear commercial corridors is the official name for it in the county, and it was a strip across Memorial Boulevard. So in working with staff, we intentionally did not request zoning because we wanted to position the property in such a way that it would be attractive for an investor, for someone to come and develop the site. So staff worked with us a little bit to deepen the corners of what are signalized intersections today. Those are shown in red now, and what we have incorporated into our proposed planned unit development. And staff indicated that they're not sure what the commercial uses are going to be. In all of our narrative and our submittal, we indicated that they would be consistent with C2 zoning uses, which is a very standard commercial zoning district within the city. So I want to go to the site plan specifically. Staff also indicated in their report that we have met several times. We've met for well over a year back and forth on this. In the original plan, it was a site sketch. It wasn't pretty like this, but it was sketched out, and it did show everything, all residential, and did not take into consideration those 2 commercial nodes. We went back and forth with staff. We since adjusted the plan. We did have several cul-de-sacs. Staff asked us to minimize the cul-de-sacs. We were not told that they were absolutely prohibited. I just know that they don't encourage multiple cul-de-sacs. We've reduced that to one. We have, since our last planning and zoning meeting in February, we originally stated that our 12-foot multi-path walking trail was going to be on the Lake Parker side, but again, as staff indicated, because of the easements, the gas lines and everything there, we have since moved it onto the development side on the south of East Lake Parker Drive. Staff was adamant about providing a connection onto Fairway. We did not want to do that. We just felt, we just did not want to do it. However, we did accommodate that. And so in the handout that I gave you, there are two 11x17s. The first one was submitted December 1st with our original PUD submittal. And the second one was submitted on the day of our planning and zoning hearing last month, which was February 16th, exactly a month ago. So, but we did try to please staff by accommodating. I mean, we went as far as, okay, we know you want an access point there, where do you want it? We couldn't necessarily line it up with the southernmost road to the east because it really doesn't meet today's standards of throat depth for queuing of cars and that type of thing. Nevertheless, we did accommodate it, and it did break up the 4 lots on the far east that abut Fairway, but we felt, okay, you know what, we do need to accommodate that. That is something that staff is looking for. So again, I do want to reiterate what I mentioned last month in the fact that the whole conservation area, which is about 9.7 acres, that is going to be deeded over to the Homeowners Association, and will remain conservation. We've depicted a dock access there, not a boat ramp, but a dock access. And we feel like with all of the conversations we've had with staff, we've probably had 4 different iterations of a plan. We really feel this is a good plan. And I know that staff went through some history. I touched on it with 2012, which our land use and annexation was actually finalized in early 13. And then Mr. Causey and I worked with Central Florida Regional Planning Council. You had a representative here today, Ms. Pat Steed. We worked with them, and they were able, and very interested in this site, and they were able to work through EPA and get a brownfield grant that funded a study of this area. And the point being, this was a former golf course. It therefore qualified. There were some tests done and that type of thing. Turned out it's a clean piece of property. But there was some pride on our end that this site was deemed the catalyst site for the whole Cumbie area. So that study was in 14. In 15, you all collectively, I'm not sure if all of you were here then in 15, but this board saw and approved zoning for 10 acres for multifamily towards where our entrance is on the north to East Lake Parker Drive. 10 acres that would allow 120 multi-unit or multifamily development. That funding fell through. That's also indicated in your staff report, but that fell through, and that was in 2015. So here we are in 2021, and Mr. Causey has an opportunity for a private investor to come in, make a capital investment in this area that has been ignored for a very long time. The owners, as I've indicated, have tried their hardest to position the property to do all this. The catalyst site with the brownfield grant it looked wonderful to have all kinds of commercial development, some assisted living facility, multifamily, but no one has approached us collectively in order to make any of that happen. So now we're before you, and we're asking for you to consider the history with this site, consider this as a PUD is a binding site plan. It's now at 206 units with access that staff wanted. It's got quite a bit of open space when you add in the conservation area along the lakefront. And we want to do a single family subdivision. Also in your packet is a different rendering of a proposed wall that we will have along Memorial. It's a 6-foot masonry wall, and the viewpoint I've provided would be standing on Memorial, and the one that I provided today is going to replace that. So, but it would be standing, you can still see the wall and Cypress Point at Lake Parker, but we're proposing some crepe myrtles on either side. This was an out-of-town firm that we contracted with to provide the rendering. So it's really, Memorial does not look like that. You all are very aware, Memorial does not look like that. This would be, what I gave you today would be more indicative of what we're trying to propose. Excuse me. Staff indicated that the single-family lots that would be behind that wall, there is, it would be lots 1 through 31. We're agreeing that none of our 2-story floor plans would be along that row, and that would be the bottom row on the other side of the wall that would then face Memorial. So limited to 1-story floor plan there, and that's lots 1 through 31. So I think I touched on everything. The C2 uses, the property owner that they mentioned. During our public hearing last month, no one came forward to discuss the project other than our development team. However, we were able to meet a couple out in the hallway that had a couple questions, and they have some rental properties that back up to us, and they were really just curious. I think they have an easement, and that was something that definitely would not be affected at all. The first time I heard of any correspondence with staff is when I read the staff report. But again, as I mentioned, but this is a blighted area, and we have what we feel would be a very sustainable subdivision. Yes, the lots are a little bit smaller, but that's addressed in the PUD. But the other comment in the staff report indicated someone was in support of it, but they did not like the access on Fairway. So again, this is what we are presenting, 206 lots. We did work hand in hand with staff, and you know, our target market is first-time home buyers, workforce housing, those that are the first responders, the nurses, teachers, and in that regard, we are referring to this as attainable. They are smaller lot sizes, but it's for first-time home buyers that are busy working people that are not interested in a very large yard that they are going to have to maintain. So we are requesting that, with all due respect, that in your role, that you overlook staff's recommendation and put this into the City Commission's hands, and they can also decide where they see policy and procedure. And you know, we're respectfully requesting that you weigh all the pros and the cons, the history of this site, and the opportunity that lies ahead for these new potential homes. So again, if you would recommend to the City Commission a recommendation of approval it would be most appreciated, and I will stand for any questions that you might have. Yes.
I have a couple of design questions. Why did you put the cul-de-sac in? What is the reason for that? How come you didn't make that a connection to the road and get rid of the entrance further down?
That land.
I'm going to let John McVeigh answer that question.
Good morning, board members. John McVeigh, Econ Engineering, 6700 South Florida Avenue, Lakeland, Florida. Excuse me. There's two issues there and it's a good question. If you look at the cul-de-sac, where it's located to the north and to the east and west, there is a large group of oak trees. And we felt like taking those oak trees out was more detrimental than having a cul-de-sac in that area, and it would allow for people on that part of the subdivision to have kind of a park area in that area. And if you also notice, if you go farther to the north and exit where the cul-de-sac is, the line of sight coming around the curve from the southwest headed north on Lake Parker Drive, the line of sight's a little bit into the curve. So we felt like it wasn't as safe an intersection
And then
putting it there.
another question I have is on the existing houses that are already there are 50-foot lots. Why didn't you match those up and do 50-foot lots along those existing residential along Fairway Avenue?
One of the reasons was the product they have is for a 40-foot product on a 40-foot lot, number one. Number two is I think there's only 3 additional houses along that whole stretch if we'd have put them 50. That's existing. The ones on the lots or on the lots 1, 2, 3, and 4 along the Fairway Drive, those were already platted as 50s. Those remain 50s. And we do have 50s on the corners of the lots. But it's a 3-lot difference, I think, based upon matching them up versus not matching them up. And we're also trying to look at the scenario of it was originally approved for 120 lots on 10 acres, which would have been, if we'd have put it over the whole site with the commercial, would have been approximately 400 units there instead of 200. And then you'd have all the commercial along the front or the frontage, which would have created a major increase in traffic along Memorial Boulevard. And I will say one thing, this project is set vacant since 1927. Mr. Causey's owned it for many, many years. On the commercial red on Fairway, that was a lounge and a bar for 50 or 60 years, which is gone now. And the overall site ran cows and it sold mobile homes. So this site has been sitting there for almost 100 years with no potential developers, no potential buyers, 100 years of property taxes being paid and no benefit to the homeowner. We finally got someone who wants to utilize this site and do a single-family subdivision instead of putting 400 or 500 homes that were apartments in there. It's just blends better with the neighborhood. Across the street is industrial. That's been there since the 40s, the old Food Machinery Corporation. I think they made amphibious vehicles during World War II there. So the site, there's been no appreciative development other than the Cumbie Road intersection in that area in the last 50 years. No new buildings, no new anything. I think the Taco Bell just closed down on the other side of the power plant and moved back down closer to Cumbie Road. So I don't want to say it's a blighted area, but it's a depressed area. And this is something to bring a little bit of activity and a little bit of rejuvenation to the community.
I would have liked to see a variety of lot sizes. That 40-foot lot those houses are all gonna be right on top of each other. And I agree with the city that I don't mind seeing some in a development, and I just wish there was a little bit of spacing between the houses. Because the product type, there's gonna be a 5-foot side yard setback, so you're gonna have 10 feet between houses, is essentially what's gonna happen through this whole development. So they're gonna be kind of really close to each other versus some variety where you could have done 50 foot on the, against the existing. I don't have an issue with the lots up against Memorial. It's just the 40-foot lots are concerning.
What are the costs of these homes? You keep talking about affordable housing. What is the price point for the homes?
It would be a guesstimate because I really don't know. We're not the home builder, we're the planners.
I understand.
But I would say you're talking in the 225 to 275 range.
Okay.
In that area.
And has anybody looked at how much vacant commercial property is in an area, a radius of, I don't know, 2 miles, 3 miles of where this is? Because it just seems to me that whole area, we're making a big deal about more commercial, land put aside for commercial property when, if I'm not mistaken, there's a lot of vacant commercial property down Memorial and down Cumbie that are sitting empty. And I'm not sure that we should jeopardize single-family dwellings that we need in this community. We've already discussed that, because we think that we need more commercial, which I don't think we do at that point in that area. I mean, there are a lot of vacant, and as I understand, both of these that are red are at this point, there's nothing there, is there?
They're
So this is vacant. So if
they're
somebody
vacant
wants to
lots,
put in
but they're lighted intersections. They
Right.
have red lights, so it gives them a safe in and out.
I do have an issue with 40-foot lots, especially for a house that's the price point that you're sort of telling me. I understand that if you make those lots larger, of course you have less homes. I understand that too. I do have a concern for that. I think that I'm, not telling you how to run your business. I'm just saying I have a concern for that, but I do think that if we're talking about low-income housing, moderate-income housing, 40-foot lots is sort of questionable, and my concern is you're going to have a lot of rental property in there if you do that.
That was our concern as well. When, just to clarify the history, where we've allowed 40-foot lots has been in the larger developments like villages at Bridgewater, and I think the Hawthorne Mill down on West Pittman Road. Those are both, more than 1,000 homes per development, and generally they were capped at that percentage, probably no more than 20 to 30% of the overall development. But we've never approved an entire subdivision of 40-foot lots, so this would establish a precedent for that. And in this area, by right, 60 feet would normally be the minimum.
Yeah, and I mean, I think putting a wall up along Memorial, I think that's a great idea. We have a lot of subdivisions in our community, they've done that. Southern Homes does it frequently, Adams Homes does it frequently. I think, I don't have a problem with it. I do have sort of a problem with the 40-foot lots though.
Has there been any discussion, I haven't heard either side mention it, about making this community more of a mix of single-family homes and attached dwellings, villas, whatever you want to call them? I mean, I was showing homes yesterday, and I'm thinking, well, one of these buildings that I showed a home in had one unit on one side that had a 2-car garage, and the one unit on the other side had a 1-car garage. Both had nice entrances, which seems to be a sticking point with the city. And maybe that would solve the density problem that the developer needs to go forward and provide the price points and the options for the buyers.
Yeah, we're doing several developments in the area, and some of them have townhomes, but townhomes are 2-story. And we're wanting to eliminate as many 2-stories because people, for some reason, still have a tendency of, I live in a 2-story, and everything, if I'm downstairs, what I need is upstairs. Mm-hmm. If I'm upstairs, what I need is downstairs. So it's, it's an inconvenience there, and I understand your concerns. I think the the concept here is that 300 or 400 apartments would create more of a low-cost development than having ownership, home ownership, pride in ownership, and they'll be able to buy these homes in today's market, and I think Ms. Thomas would agree with that, probably cheaper than they could pay rent in an apartment, you know, because of the interest rates and the cost of the home. So it's really just giving an area. It's all market driven, a lot of it is, you know, and market driven is based upon economics. I do know that the price of a 2x4 used to be $3 a piece. Today they're $7 a piece because everybody blames coronavirus, the fires in California, the snows in Texas, you know, everything's got a reason for it, but home prices have probably gone up on the construction side 22% in the last year. So we're trying to keep an affordable home, but also keep a nice home.
Yeah,
And you were talking on 40 and 50-foot lots. Most 50-foot product lots still have a 5-foot setback because they can put a little bigger house on it. So that's really the, you know, we feel like it's a good plan. We've set, I mean, I think the nearest lot's over 100 feet from Lake Parker Drive. It's got a centralized recreation area. It's got interconnectivity. We've eliminated down to one cul-de-sac. We have about 63 what we call overflow parking spots. So if people come in and there's visitors or guests or what all, there's places through the community they can park. It's not just limited to someone's driveway. And this is being done to discourage on-street parking.
I think what Ms. Thomas was talking about was not townhouses. She was talking about adjoined housing.
You mean duplexes?
No, they're
Triplex.
adjoined, they're single-family homes that are
There's
together.
a number of different terms you can use, but yes, but I know they're in very high demand.
I mean, I live
And I
in
know
one, there's 4 homes together. It's adjoined housing. It's not a
you know, there's-
townhouse. It's not an apartment.
I mean,
Well, those are builder issues and develop that, you know, and I personally can't answer that question.
So I guess I'm hearing that, no, that's never been discussed in all.
Well, we've
all this.
discussed it, but that's not what they market and what they need to market for this site in their marketing opinion.
Okay.
You're talking these 40-foot fronts. What is the square footage of living space in one of those homes? It's 175.
In the handout that I provided, it's just 2 examples of floor plans. So 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,486 square feet. Is that what you mean, the living area, or do you mean minimum lot size?
Living area.
Living areas.
Living
Fit
area.
like 1,500
Yeah,
for
so
like a single story.
14 to 16, some 22.
some 22, 1973 is the Sydney model.
Yeah.
Here's one 2,500.
The Westlake.
Okay, 25, say 2,500 versus one of your smaller ones. You're saying your price range for affordable housing is going to be between 2.25 and 275?
Yes, that's what he said.
I have the same concern Susan has. I think that considering that affordable housing, I think you're going to wind up with a lot of rentals. So I don't think the individual you might classify someone who can who go for affordable housing is going to spend $275,000.
Well, today's construction costs,
Well,
that's what the developer's up against.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Mr. Phillips, the 275 would probably be the top. The majority of the homes probably going to be in the 225 to 245 range based upon what sells the best. You know, they're going to have 8 or 10 models that they can sell from. And it's kind of like going to buy a car. You know, everybody doesn't buy the most expensive. A lot of people buy the smaller cars or the little cheaper cars, you know, those kind of things. So you're right, 275 in today's market may not be an affordable sustainable house, I don't know, or maintainable house, but today's interest rate, a $200,000 home, the payments are probably less than $850 a month, plus taxes and insurance. You know, because the interest rates, I think,
that's as long as the interest rates stay where they are.
yeah, at 2 to 4% in that range.
Right, yeah. If they go up where they normally are, these are unaffordable to low-income people.
Any other comments or questions from the board? Okay, do you have anything else, do the developers have anything else to say?
I just want to make a comment. I would love to see this built because we really need this. I mean, we've been talking about this a large portion today. My personal opinion is I think you need wider lots.
At least on the perimeter.
Well,
I think our concern with the 40-foot lots is long-term because they have such minimal yard space that they wouldn't seem to be conducive to producing the type of neighborhoods where people invest in their properties over time. Because there's really no room to expand. You can't even put a pool or anything else in the back there, so you're very constrained from the get-go. And we understand the market is changing. When I joined the city 15 years ago, 50 feet was the standard. Now 40 is the new 50, and that's the market driving all this. But they're basically trying to do the same house squished in on a smaller lot. But I think there's some implications, there's some costs that need to be considered. And, you know, we're open to other designs, things that may address those, but we don't think what they're proposing is a good fit and not consistent with our code.
I mean, I think it's honorable putting two-car garages. We've talked about having a garage for people to put their things. I think with a family especially, you have to have a two-car garage. And that's not going to change regardless of how large the lot is. But, I mean, that's just my only concern. My only concern is that these lots are awfully narrow.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
There's been a lot of discussion. I don't know if any of the other folks were here from the public to comment. Since we've had a lot of discussion, it may be appropriate to allow public comment as well. We do have some folks that would like to speak.
Come forward, yes. Yes,
come on down.
I'm Nancy Kearns. I have a property on Fairway
Could you give us your...
in the blighted area. And to me, I've got the nicest one in the whole area. But this entrance that they're talking about having on Fairway, I really don't think that that's such a hot idea because of the area. I mean, do we want our area to come into your area? Anyway, my one concern, well, a couple of concerns. When we talked about this several years ago, they were talking about multi-housing, you know, a bunch of apartments. So in comparison to 40 foot or a bunch, I'd rather have the smaller, you know, houses. There's a lot of houses that don't have very much space between them, and they're bigger houses. Anyway. But my property is at 702, and it's down at the end of Magnolia, and I have a 2-story apartment building behind me. If we put up a 6-foot fence or barrier, when it rains a lot, we can flood. So where is this? You know, if you build it down to the ground, I don't have that much space between back of my property and where it's going to go. It's only going to be about like that. Am I going to flood? So that's, you know, for the people that have property along there, they have more of a backyard and it doesn't really matter.
Where is your apartment building right here?
It's right here. Magnolia.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, Magnolia, because I've got I built my own street, so I was not
Just
wanting
to,
you to use that.
clarify, they would not be required to put a wall adjacent to the homes on Fairway. It would only be the portion of the property adjacent to 92 would be where the buffer is.
But anyway, so the land goes down to the lake, so I wanted my property to keep flowing that way. Because it could be a problem for me then, if you've got this wall. And then the other thing is, can we buy some lots? I've got a beautiful tree that's behind me, it's beautiful. And I'm hoping it's on a lot right there that I can buy and keep that tree. So, you know, there's pros and cons to everything. But would I rather have multi-housing like you did to around Lake Beulah? No. I'd rather have single houses. It's just a discussion here, right?
I'm David Kearns. I'm the husband of, my wife's family came from Ohio in 1955 and settled in the Fairway Avenue subdivision. And we have maintained that since the passing of. What my wife is concerned, as I am, is, as she stated, if we get a lot of rains, it floods in that one along the pasture line. And Mr. Causey, I wish you well. If everything passes, and hopefully it will, we're going to miss the girls and the babies in the back. And Mr. Causey knows what I'm talking about. But it's the elevation of, with new development, and I'm aware of the new construction, what's required of them. So we discussed briefly with Ms. Case at the last meeting after, and not only with the elevation, but also the buffering to the rear of, paralleling the properties on Fairway. I don't know if it's, and my only experience is with 21 years with the Board of County Commissioners. I was a bad guy. And I know, because I used to work this area in code enforcement, I know the reason behind the word blight. I was several times removed from there because people didn't like me, because I was too hard on them. Well, hardness and fairness is two different things. So, but anyway, getting back to this. 40-foot lots, I disagree with that. 50 or 60 lots, and that way you're increasing your setbacks from a 5 to a 10 or 12, sometimes 15, especially in the rear. But my thing is, I'm out of time, but the buffering, will it be vegetative? Will it be solid? We don't know. So that would be the only disagreement we have, is the footage of the lots, the setbacks, and the buffering. I thank you. My time is up.
Any other comments from the audience? Any questions from the board?
I have a statement. My concern is that if we allow this development to go forward with a majority of 40-foot lots, we set precedent. Part of me wants to pass this on to City Commission and let them decide. There are elected officials. I'm really torn. I really am. I don't want to set that precedent for the city.
Mr. Chair, if I can make just a couple of comments to that. One, that the board doesn't set precedent, technically speaking, but the concern is what some people label bootstrapping, where once something is established, then you could put something next to it and argue that it's compatible. So it does allow for an argument of compatibility, or it was done there, so we should be able to do it here. But it's not binding. None of that would be binding on the board, and all future applications would have to stand on their own merits, and you would be able to review or the board would review each application on its merits. But there is what some people call bootstrapping is a concern. It's slightly different than precedent in the fact that the board isn't actually going to be bound, where a precedent would be binding on the board in future decisions. As far as the second concern that you have about the commission being able to review it, if the board approves it today, then it automatically goes to the commission for the final approval with the board's recommendation for approval. If the board denies it, then that decision is considered final. However, there is an appeal provision in the code that allows an applicant to request the city commission to review a denial from this board. So there's still an avenue available to the applicant to get in front of the city commission if the board denies. And since there's been a lot of discussion, to just remind the board again, there's always 3 options for the board in any case, and that's approval, approval with conditions, or a denial. I guess I should also mention that you could potentially continue the item as well if you felt like there was a lack of information. But generally speaking, approval with conditions, or denial are your options. And obviously the applicant's recommending or requesting approval as presented, and then the city staff is recommending a denial.
So even in the event that it gets denied, it's not denying any future recommendations back to this board. Is that correct? I mean, they could go and perhaps talk with city staff.
There is a 1-year period, and I think that there was the recommendation was to deny without prejudice, which would allow, I think, if that was specifically stated, for them to come back within that 1-year period. I think also if the application is substantially different, then it could come back in front of the board without that, without waiting for the full 1 year.
So apparently there are several reservations several of the board members had. And if I'm wrong, please all correct me, but if we then deny without prejudice, it gives them the opportunity to come back, get back with the city, try and work out these differences that exist.
Correct. They could come back
And
next month or 2 months later, whenever they would not be required to wait a year.
Okay. And if the board votes against that motion to deny without prejudice, then we review the other options open to the board, whether it's to deny, to recommend, and so forth. Correct?
Well, let me just first clarify too that if someone makes a motion to deny without prejudice and the board votes to approve that motion, the applicant would have 2 options. One, they could go to work with staff to try to figure out what the issues are and come back before this board as soon as possible. Or 2, they could invoke the review provision that I just described, and they could go to the city commission and request that the city commission overrule this board and approve the project. So they'd have both of those options. And to your second question, if someone makes a motion to deny the project and that motion doesn't get enough votes to pass, then that motion fails and essentially the board hasn't taken any action. So someone else would have to make a different motion, and we would keep going through that process until a motion got enough votes to pass, and that would be the action of the board, whatever it may be.
Well, I think the first thing that we need to look at is if anyone wishes to make a motion to deny without prejudice.
I'd make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'm not I can't understand what you're saying. What did you
We
put?
deny without prejudice, then the
Staff recommendation.
builder has an opportunity to go back to the city and try and work out their differences and come back to us. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? That's our action.
All right, item 7, election of new officers.
So I'm just trying to catch up here. So as you see on this slide is the current listing of officers, and we do have a vacant chair position. So I know that Matthew did have some conversations with a few of you the other day, trying to gauge your interest in wanting to fill that vacancy and then perhaps have some others move up. And so I would leave it to the board then if anyone wants to entertain nominations for chair. And then you would vote, you can either vote individually on each position, or I think take it as a complete slate of officers if someone wants to nominate all 3 of those positions.
So, proceed from here. We ask for nominations for each.
You can do it by each position if you want to do that, and if you think that's easiest, to start off with the chair and then see if there's a vacancy created with perhaps someone else, moving up from another position to chair.
Okay, so we'll start with the chair position, I guess. Are there any nominations for chair?
I nominate Lyle Phillipson for chair.
A second.
God will get you for that. Any other nominations? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
But we're assuming that you're accepting the nomination.
Considering, I want to see if the pay grade's going up.
We'll double your pay.
Okay, all right. So the next nomination would be for vice chair.
I volunteer to do vice chair.
Good, okay. All in favor? Or is there any other nominations? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations. Okay, and then secretary would be the last position.
I would volunteer as secretary.
Right. Anyone else wants to volunteer? No? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you all.
And then item 8, report of city commission action on planning and zoning board recommendations.
There were 3 ordinances that were heard by the City Commission on March 1st for first reading, and it was actually advanced to the City Commission yesterday for second reading. This is always a bit cumbersome because of the fact that at the time that we publish the agenda, it's prior to the City Commission second meeting. So those 3 ordinances were the ones for the single-family attached dwelling units on Lake Hollingsworth Drive, the single-family attached dwelling units on Druid Street, and then finally the Morgan Creek Preserve modification to the PUD. The first one passed, so the Lake Hollingsworth townhome development did receive approval. The Druid Street development, that was, oh goodness, I'm trying to remember now because it was a long meeting. That one was denied.
It was postponed.
Postponed, that's right, it was continued. And then finally, the one on Hamilton Road, that one was denied.
That was the Morgan Creek one?
That's correct, yes.
That one was denied, you said?
Yes.
I think after, 2.5 hours of discussion, I believe.
I believe that. That's surprising.
That's one we saw last month.
That's correct. Yes, that was for the 56 single-family units south of Medela Road in the vicinity of Hamilton and Medela. And coming up, moving on to the next item for new cases, there's an accessory dwelling unit request off of Lake Hollingsworth Drive. And there is a change in zoning to allow for some additional commercial uses on property located at 3252 Kathleen Road. And I think that existing use there is a pawn shop, if you're familiar with it. It's on the west side of Kathleen, up past Sleepy Hill.
The Prime Road, this intersection?
Yes, Prime Road. And that concludes the staff items.
Any other business, any comments? In that case, I would say we are adjourned and thank everybody for coming.